Welcome to the Unfair Advantage Sessions, a series of interviews with some of the world's top leaders in the digital, social, and research technology industry. My name is Calvin Jonk. I'm the MD of a South African company dedicated to being the glue between these incredible global technology providers and local African professionals. And I believe that the tech is only as good as the people behind them, and from the end users and their needs to the creators, the founders, and the leaders of the companies themselves. So these interviews are intended to be a bit of a deep dive into the experiences, the history, and the philosophies that led these leaders to where they are now. And our goal is to uncover their unfair advantage. So today I've got the incredible pleasure to speak to the founder and CEO of the company which has supported my company for the longest period, Brandwatch. Giles Palmer, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Giles, there's quite a lot I want to talk about, but I thought let's start with the elephant in the room, I suppose, is my company, worked with another company called Crimson Hexagon for many years. And now we work with you guys at Brandwatch. Would you mind explaining how that change came about? And maybe while you're doing it, give us a brief overview of what Brandwatch is.
Yeah, sure thing, Kelvin. So Brandwatch had been going for something like 8 or 9 years. And we're a venture capital backed company. We'd raised a bunch of money. We'd opened up offices in the US and on continental Europe. It was from the UK originally, where it started in the UK. Brighton, yeah, little Brighton, which is kind of seaside, kind of holiday town. Anyway, we got to maybe $50 or $60 million in revenue. And the reason why I kind of call out the number is because that's like a kind of a proxy for a level of maturity within a B2B software company. So not massive, not big, not kind of, one of these sort of household name sort of things, but also not really a small startup anymore. So in the kind of middle years of a software company, you tend to kind of go one way or the other. Mostly it's like you get sold, right? So just, you get to a certain scale and then usually you get sold to a bigger kind of software business for kind of consolidation or possibly a private equity company, and they maybe can do some consolidation and so on and so forth. So that you get into this kind of period of the life of the company where you just think, okay, where's it going? Furthermore, when you take on venture capital investment, what I've come to realize is that you're starting a clock, and that clock is at some point you're going to need to allow the investors to sell their stake in the company, because that's their business model, right? They put money or fuel, as it were, into a company as it's looking like it's kind of taking off. But it's loss making because it costs money to build software and hire salespeople, especially SaaS. SaaS is one of these, subscription business models where you build the thing up front, you hire the salespeople up front, you build the company pretty much, or part of the company up front, and then you rent it, right? You rent the solution to people. So there's this big upfront capital requirement to actually build a company and hire the salespeople and so on and so forth before you start getting that rental income. So it's almost impossible to build a SaaS company without VC money, or at least like significant investment. So you get to this point, VCs are going to want their money back. You're in the kind of the middle years of an organization, and it's like you're faced with this choice as a founder, and that choice is basically, are you a consolidator? Are you going to start kind of building a bigger and bigger group? Because unless you're one of these like really rare companies that's growing at 50, 100% when you're already $50 million in revenue, that's very unusual. I mean, Slack did it and Zoom have done it and so on. But the reason why their names is because there aren't that many of them. Or are you going to be part of somebody else's group? Are you going to get consolidated? And so I looked around at that point and thought, actually, we're in a pretty strong position. I'm enjoying it. I really like what we're doing. It's interesting. We're kind of, we think we're creating a new kind of intelligence by adding structure and meaning to social media data. And I just thought this is this is a long-term kind of play, and we're the biggest in the market. And okay, let's have a go at consolidating the market. So I went and spoke to a few of the other players in the market. Crimson Hexagon was pretty much the next biggest. They were also US based. We were UK based. So it kind of made sense to kind of bridge the Atlantic. And we looked at whether we could actually combine the software to make something which was going to be better than, at least as good as, but better than either of the two products that made it up. And if that was possible, and then we realized it was possible. So we thought, well, okay, let's do this deal, and let's create a bigger organization, and a market leader, and a company with a bigger engineering team, and one that can innovate more quickly, and so on and so forth. So that was the reason why we did it.
So I mean, I guess there was a couple of routes you could have gone. A lot of similar companies would go and acquire it or merge with a company that does a complementary service. So a social listening company would go and join with a social media management company. And you guys decided to, like you said, double down on social intelligence. What was the thinking behind that?
That's a really good question. I've not been asked that question before. I think
Giles,
the simple reason for that is that as a software business, you don't really have a distribution problem. I mean, you kind of do. You've got to get in front of the right buyers and so on and so forth. But the internet is your distribution platform, so that's really a marketing issue rather than a distribution issue. And so what happens is, especially in an emerging kind of space, you get companies of a similar size competing ferociously with each other. I was going to say ferociously with each other, and from a buyer's point of view, it's not obvious which one to go to, right? So you're constantly kind of in this kind of mosh pit, fighting each other, grabbing customers from each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you've got a market or kind of a slice of the market for which there's a clear leader, and that leader is demonstrably better and has a better product, better service, is clearly the one to go for. Maybe they're a little bit more expensive, but nevertheless, most people would choose that one. It's easier to run that business, and it's also a more successful business. So really, it was kind of, Brandwatch was slightly the biggest in the market, but there were 4 or 5 companies that were roughly the same size. Pretty much everybody was losing money, and it was like, this market needs to actually become more efficient. It needs to have 1 or 2 companies that can be profitable, and that will be the obvious ones that for buyers to go to. So that was the rationale. Like, create the number one in the market that was the right the right choice for most people, assuming we could execute against that vision, right? Make it profitable, and then use that as a base for possibly further M&A down the road.
Yeah, I mean that's, and I think I would say that you guys have done that. So it's an incredible story so far. When did you start Brandwatch specifically?
We launched in August 2007, so 13 years ago.
Yeah, but that wasn't your first stint at building a company, right? What were
that was my third. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the experiences leading up to that, the other companies you built, or even some of the ones that you worked at. What's that story look like?
Yeah. So sure thing. I left university with a physics degree, not knowing what I wanted to do. I didn't want to become a research physicist. So I trained in business, and I got an accountancy qualification, which I didn't enjoy as a profession. I didn't want to become an accountant. So this was in the early 90s. So I thought, okay, let's go and work in I didn't want to join the city. That doesn't appeal to me as a kind of a lifelong profession. So I wanted to get into business or industry. So I went to a couple of big companies, really hated the big company thing, too corporate, too dull. I remember thinking, if I don't turn up to work today, this company won't suffer at all. And that was just the most soul-destroying moment, I thought, and then I quit the next day. Anyway, I ended up at Sky when Sky was going digital. I was running their kind of business planning department and doing deals. And then a friend of mine at Sky and we decided to try and launch an e-commerce play on interactive TV. And at that time, Sky needed a health and beauty site. So me and this friend Jeremy decided that we'll create a health and beauty startup. We called it 5 Senses, and we hired a couple of buyers. We quit our jobs. We hired a couple of buyers. A woman from Liberty and another woman from QVC. A friend of Jeremy's introduced us to an software engineer called Steve. And so the 5 of us built this little company, 5 Senses, over about 3 or 4 months. We got a deal with Sky to build this online, well, it wasn't online, on TV health and beauty thing. Raised $1.5 million, which was a total blast from some extraordinary characters and individuals that were introduced by Jeremy's contacts and families. Just amazing experience. I'll come back to that's a whole nother story, a whole nother episode. And then it went to the board of Sky Interactive, this deal, just to get it signed off. And they said, who are these people and what's their retail experience? And the CEO of Sky Interactive said, well, they used to work here, and they want to build a kind of an online, interactive TV health and beauty store. And they were like, well, they need more money. They need to go and raise another $5 million, or I think it was, or maybe even $10 million. And this was at the end of '99 when the e-commerce crash, or the dot-com bubble burst, right? So we couldn't raise that money. So that business kind of folded within a month or two. So it was like a firework. 4 months went straight up in the air. Me and Jeremy put 25 grand in each. And then it just came straight back down to earth like four months later. But it was that experience. And when we came back and told the team, we're shutting this down because we didn't get the deal with Sky. The 2 women from Liberty and Steve basically said, so 2 buyers, all of the staff, they said, well, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do next? Let's build an online shop. Let's do whatever. And if my heart had been in health and beauty as a category, I'd have gone, yeah, because if we were having such fun and we kind of had got to know each other, and it was like there was a real life and energy in that little group. But I didn't give a shit about selling perfumes and cosmetics. So I just said no. It was really about that deal with Sky. And my lesson there was actually you've got to have an interest in a passion, or at least some sort of connection with what you're doing, because if you don't, it's so easy to give up when something doesn't go your way, right? Whereas with Brandwatch, plenty of stuff has not gone our way. We've had lots of those, moments where you got to go and do this, you got to go and do that, or we're not going to give you the deal or whatever. And rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to stop now because this is not meant to be or whatever, I was like, okay, fine, I'll go off and do it. And it didn't feel, I mean, it sounds a bit trite, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like, well, it's just part of the journey, right? Yeah. Anyway, so that was 5 Senses. And so that didn't work out. And then Steve, who was just doing a PhD at Sussex University, had a couple of other friends who were also doing a PhD in AI and computer science. Said to me, look, Giles, we want to set up a tech consultancy building software for other people. We don't know anything about finance or selling. Actually, he was a really good sales guy, but he wasn't. That's not how he thought of himself. Will you come and join? Or do you want to come and join us? So they all lived in Brighton. Because they were doing a PhD at Sussex. I lived in West London. We all put in £5,000. I was pretty much skint at that point, having blown 25,000 on the previous one. That was the beginning of the end of my marriage, actually. And we started this company, which which was called Runtime Collective. And that name was a name that one of their friends had come up with, or one of the other guys, Ollie and Guillaume, had come up with. You know, super geeky name, right? Runtime. That's when the computer exercise executes code, and collective. We're all in it together, and we had this idea that we'd all get paid the same. We'd hire their friends from university. We'd all get paid the same, and everything would be transparent and open, and we'd run it as a collective. Some of that, and by the way, Brandwatch, the company behind Brandwatch, is still Runtime Collective Limited.
Yeah.
Right? So Brandwatch kind of came out of that 5 years in.
So what was Runtime Collective doing before you came up with Brandwatch? What was the purpose of?
We called ourselves web engineers, and we built systems for our clients. And to start with, we built any system for anybody. We were just basically kind of geeks for hire. So I managed to land the first couple of contracts. I think I did some work on even on the coding on some of them, but I can't remember. It was a long time ago. And they were basically using open source software to build systems for customers, and the sorts of things that our customers wanted. The first thing that we did was build a subscription, a content management and subscription management system for an IT magazine. So it was a B2B magazine. So they had, I don't know, 50,000 subscribers. So we built them a subscriber management platform, and we built them a content management platform to allow them to publish directly onto the web. Right. And then they took that content and they pushed it through Quark Express, and they created their magazine and sent that magazine out as a physical copy. That was in 2000, right? We built that, we scoped it and built it in 2000. And, you know, they were either going to go and buy a solution called Vignette, which was like $750,000, or they paid us $200,000 to build it from scratch using open source software. And we did it. We worked ourselves really hard. I mean, it was just brutal. Ollie and Guillaume in particular worked insanely hard, and we shipped this thing, and it worked. It was good, and it was based on this thing called the Ars Digita Community System, which was an open source software platform that used, you know, database backed software with a kind of scripting layer running on a web server to you know, to host websites and to push stuff online. So you know, early web stuff. This was 2000, right? And then the next thing we built was an email marketing platform, a spamming system, which thankfully isn't used anymore. Then we built an online school, and so on. And so we built a whole bunch of stuff, and we learned an insane amount around how to build software, how not to build software. We discussed the merits and the challenges of open source versus, you know, because this is basically the beginning of SaaS, although we didn't call it SaaS back then. And we weren't building once and deploying many times. We were basically implementing one system for one company, another system for another. It was online, of course, so it was sitting on web servers wherever. Actually, we ended up buying the servers and hosting it on our servers for our customers. So we went through this early stage of like kind of imagining what SaaS would look like, but we never figured out that actually if we built it once and then licensed it to people like WordPress.com, for example, we could have built a content management system platform, but we weren't mature enough or good enough to figure that out.
So but you did that for a couple of years, right? I mean, that must be
5 years. I mean, you know, we ended up like year 3. I think we made £3 million or £2.5 million in revenues, and we were kind of like doing really well. Year 4, I think we made some bad mistakes, and I made zero. You know, as a partner in the firm, I took home zero that year, which was that was the year that So I went through personal challenges. My marriage failed and so on.
Yeah, it's not bad for a $5,000 was it pound investment a couple of years before.
Yeah.
So
we never raised any money.
Yeah, incredible. I love that. So how did the idea to veer into social listening and social intelligence then come about? So you're busy building software for other people. What happens? What makes you decide that that's the direction to go in, and how does Brandwatch start?
Well, Guillaume had, so of the four partners, Guillaume had gone back into academia. Ollie had left the company. Basically, we had a bad year, and Ollie felt really bad, and because he felt like he was responsible for it, and so he kind of resigned. So Steve and I were left kind of as the two partners. We were probably about 30 people. We were still running it like in very much a very transparent way, but at this point, not everybody was paid the same, because it became obvious pretty quickly that some people were more valuable than others. And it wasn't the founders that were saying that, it was the staff. Like, somebody would come up to me and say, hang on a second, I'm paid the same as him, and I'm doing twice as much work as him, and all my customers are really successful, and his not so much, sort of thing. I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point. Yeah. And when presented with that kind of, Animal Farm type argument sort of thing, you realize that actually this whole utopia idea of everybody paid the same and full transparency doesn't work so well in practice. We've got this cooperation competition thing going on as human beings. And so which I find utterly fascinating, because we both compete with and cooperate with our colleagues and our customers and partners and so on all the time. It's really, really interesting. Open source software is a great example of that, and played out in digital. Anyway, so we got to a point after about 5 years that the motivation for running a company like Runtime Collective was beginning to wane, I think, for Steve and I, because it's like, what's going on here? We're not really learning as much as we were at the beginning. What are we building? Like, what's the purpose? We ran this experiment to build this collective, kind of worked in some levels, kind of didn't work on others. It worked on the kind of cultural aspect, didn't work on the economic aspect. But where's it going? And at that point, and this was 2006, possibly something around that sort of time. Google was emerging, Facebook was emerging, Twitter. Like, there were incredible things happening in the world of online, and we were this kind of little company in Brighton, and it was like, well, Steve is an insanely smart dude, and did go off and work for Google and then DeepMind. And I was a bit more ambitious than what we were doing. So the two of us were like, either we shut this down or we pivot or something. I wanted to build a product company, so we built a system for a customer, which was the kind of beginnings of a web crawler. And so I thought, I had this idea of Brandwatch. So I thought, well, I'll take that and I'll build this Brandwatch thing I've got in my head. And Steve was like, well, I want to go and join Google. So he went off and joined Google, and I built Brandwatch.
So I mean, when you say it started off as a web crawler, when we talk web crawler, are we talking Google type, search engine type web crawler, or what?
Yeah. So I mean, you can buy web crawlers as a service now. It's actually a pretty simple technology. What it is basically a kind of like a bot that goes to a website, downloads the HTML, can cycle through by following links, or takes an RSS feed and then just goes to the most recent stuff, downloads the HTML, strips out all of the stuff which is irrelevant, like navigation, adverts, footers, anything which is on every page, and then gets the kind of the rump of the page, like the meat of the page, and puts it in an index, and that index then can be serve as a lookup for a search engine. So yeah, that's exactly right. And we built the first kind of half a version, if you like, of a web crawler, and now you can rent them for nothing, right, or not much. But I thought we could take this, and the search engine opportunity is clearly not there any longer. But an insights engine is, like, brands need to understand what the world is saying about them. And that's where it started.
So this is what, 2007? You say end of 2006, 2007.
Exactly, November 2006.
social media is on the rise, and you've built this web crawler that is going and essentially indexing content and that's out there. Was it an obvious choice to focus that on the social and I suppose publishing side of the web early on, or did that come a bit later?
It was very much the choice from the beginning. Okay. It wasn't called social media back then. It was called things like consumer generated media or user generated content, UGC, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we focused, and it was things like forums, like special interest forums, like Money Saving Expert and Mumsnet, and auto blogs and so on and so forth. Those were the big things at the beginning, and then of course Twitter came about pretty much around that time, and Facebook and so on. So it very quickly went from forums and blogs to news, and then social, and that
And what did the industry look like back then? Was there a lot of competition? Were there people doing similar things, and was there a need in the industry, or did you have to go out and create that need and that interest?
So when I had the idea, and it wasn't just me sitting in a bath, sort of eureka moment. It was with a couple of friends and just thinking things through. But when we kind of came up with this idea, kind of felt like, oh, this is an original idea because I'd never heard of it before. But then we did some research, and there were already companies doing it, right? So Nielsen, which you've probably heard of, the big market research company, they already had a technology called Buzzmetrics, and they'd written lots of papers online around sentiment analysis and language analysis and so on. When we looked at that, we were like, oh God, they're years ahead of us. And I remember one of our engineers saying, well, we'll never catch them up. Like, they're years ahead of us. They're really smart. And I just thought, well, we're going to give it a try. I was just pig-headed. I probably didn't have a plan B, which is helpful, actually. Not having a plan B is really helpful. And then there were a couple of other companies. There was a company called Symphony in the US. In fact, there was a Forrester Wave that talked about I can't remember what they were called, but maybe online reputation management tools or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So there were a few, but none of them were great software. Nielsen was the closest to software, like pure software solution. But we came at it like, we're just going to build this in tech. And of course, that's hard because you've got to analyze the language and do all of the scaling of the back end to deal with the enormous amount of data. But then eventually, when the tech gets close to or overtakes the human, then game over.
Yeah, sure. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of how a company like Crimson Hexagon started, and then comparing it to how Brandwatch started, Crimson came at it from almost from the text analysis point of view. When Gary King came up with these algorithms to analyze large amounts of text, and you guys came at it from a data source and indexing perspective, right? So two similar companies in the same industry, but coming at it from completely different directions. In retrospect, it's an obvious union that you guys joined forces in the end, correct?
Yeah, but 100%. You're absolutely right on the DNA of the two companies. I would say that a second piece of DNA for Brandwatch is that our early customers were agencies in the UK. Like, when you talked about having to start a market, there were competitors, but they were all US based. Nobody was doing anything in the UK. So we would go and pitch to, let's say, British Gas, and they go, well, this is interesting. Don't know who here would use this, or we don't have a budget line for it. So 100% it was an educational play, as in we were educating the market for the first 3 or 4 years. And that is hard work, right? It's really hard work, because no matter, you have to convince people, A, that they need it, and then secondly, that they need to find the budget and it fits into their organization, and so on and so forth. And it's just really, really tough, unless there's an obvious swap out and the software is as good as the humans, which there wasn't at the time. Anyway, the early adopters for Brandwatch were agencies, digital agencies in London in particular, and they had a vast number of needs. So their customers had these different use cases. They were different languages, different industries. So it was very quickly into the evolution of Brandwatch. We realized that we needed to build flexibility into the user experience. So the users needed to be able to use these tools to actually do lots of different tasks. So that's why even today, Brandwatch feels a little bit like a kind of Swiss Army knife, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that once you know how to use it, you can use it for everything. But if you don't know how to use it, it's like, whoa, this is like all I want to do is this one thing. And then I've got all of these like other blades what are these other blades? So, that's one thing that we're looking to solve actually in 2021.
Okay.
So yeah.
And it's fascinating that, how you guys kind of got to this point where I think you are now being able to solve all three of those things at the same time. But it's been a journey. Do you remember what that first big deal was that, you said agencies, but was there one big deal that really stood out for you that you just thought, this is the client that is going to help take us into the future?
That never quite that level of that singularity, but I remember every single one of the first 10 deals that we did. I remember the people. I remember I can almost put myself back in the room. The first deal we did was we launched a product in August 2007, and then Jonathan Wright, who's a guy that I met, I think, on a digital ski holiday, worked at Alliance in Leicester, which was a building society in the UK, mutual fund sort of thing, and I pitched it to him, and he said, "Yeah, we'll buy a subscription. We want to track, in particular, these kind of financial forums for mentions of our product, of these products that we've got, and this new product that we're launching, which I think was called Premier 21. It was an account that was aimed at 21-year-olds." And so they paid us £1,500, £1,500 a month for access to all of the whole system. And they were our first customer. And I'm not even sure he knows that, actually. You don't tell your first customer that, oh, by the way, you're our first customer, because you think that they'll be like, what? I thought you were much more significant than you are, sort of thing. Cool. So there's this kind of moment where you just want to kind of give him a hug and say thank you for being our first customer, but we'll tag him in the link. Say that. Yeah, I think now I would. Like, I'm older and like, more gnarly, and I'd be like, you know what, you're our first customer. You're the pioneer. You're the genius that saw this before anybody else. There's ways of turning it around, right? Yeah. Exactly. Anyway, I've never actually when we IPO the company, I will find Jonathan and send him a bottle of whiskey. Anyway, so that was the first one, but then we didn't make our second sale for 4 months. Wow. So that was really, and we were running out of money. So I managed to raise a second kind of significant seed round, like £500,000, during the period between making our first and second sale, which was a miracle, actually, or at least it was fortuitous. So then, with the second sale was an agency. An organization called Market Sentinel, run by a guy that became a really good friend of mine, Mark Rogers, and his brother Simon. And that was they looked at our products and said, this is exactly what we've been wanting. And that was so good when you hear something like that. Yeah. They were paying us a couple of thousand a month. And then there was a company in Brighton, an agency in Brighton called Spannerworks. It was our third customer. But the one that actually stands out to answer your question was when a London media agency paid us £7,500 a month. And that was in March 2008. So 9 months after we launched, £7,500 a month. We were like, holy shit, like that's so much money for us. Like it was, that's still a big, a decent deal for Brandwatch. And I remember thinking at that moment, if somebody's prepared to pay us that amount of money, there's value here.
So Giles, I think, a couple of years ago, there was the I mean, I think there was a discussion already around private data, or people's public and private data being used, and maybe used in nefarious ways, and suddenly there was an awakening to the realization that the stuff that they're saying online is maybe not as private as they think it is, and I think the movement started, and the Cambridge Analytica story came out, and that really sparked this public interest in that kind of stuff. But how does that influence the way that you guys are thinking about Brandwatch, and the way that you're seeing the future of Brandwatch? Our whole industry is about understanding social and digital discussion. So these last few years have been quite fascinating, but it's going to change. Our whole view of how we leverage that for interest is going to change. How do you see that influencing what you guys do at a company like Brandwatch?
Yeah, I think I've probably got maybe three things to say on this. Firstly, that it's the use to which you put the data that's the most important thing, and that use can be for good or for not so good. If you're using private information or personally identifiable information to influence people's choices around elections and somehow kind of pseudo brainwash them, then obviously that's not great, right? If you're using that information to better serve them, to give them more of what they want and ask for, to understand them better, then you could say, well, that's perfectly good, if not just good, but that's something that we should encourage. So it's but how do you police the usage? Like, that's really very, very challenging. And once that data gets out there, because it's free to copy, as it were, digital data is free as in money, as in beer, to copy. And there's no kind of rights management attached to personal data. It's very challenging to actually police that. So then you move into the next idea, which is the idea around anonymizing that data. So you take out the PII, personally identifiable information, and you start to look at human data, behavioral data in cohorts based on some similarity, location, age, preferences, whatever. And of course, grouping people together into anonymized data sets is challenging, because you have to understand how you're doing it and so on and so forth. So, but it does give you safeguards against that kind of abuse of usage. My personal view is that the aggregation, analysis, understanding, and use of large-scale data sets is massively important to move us forwards as a species. The reason why human beings are where we are is because we have language, and we pass down stories and information to each generation, and then we started to print it and have libraries and so on, and that we're able to collect, store, and share information and make ourselves smarter, and that's allowed us to become to evolve to where we've got to right now. And we're about to kind of go into a phase of evolution, which I think is an explosive phase, where you've got massive amounts of data and the ability to analyze it at an extraordinary scale. And if you just take one obvious example, which is health data, and how in diagnosing different diseases and looking at the cell structure and the genetics of different people and how that's affected their health over their life, we will be able to create treatments and genetic surgeries and whatever that will actually improve and extend human life. Yeah. Now, we're only going to be able to do that if we share health data, DNA, cellular analysis at scale. But the benefits are huge. Like, enormous. We could double human lifespans within the next kind of 50 years by kind of getting smart with how we use our biometric data.
Yeah.
Now, that's gonna happen, of course, because it's in everybody's best interest. How we make it happen safely is a really interesting challenge, and it's one of the challenges of our time.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think there's definitely a second discussion for us to have around that and the evolution of humans and that next step. And I think the term you use is collective intelligence. Incredibly fascinating stuff. So I'd love to kind of dig into that in another episode.
Love to.
Giles, thank you so much. I think, founding, building, and running a company as successful as Brandwatch for 13, 14 years is just such an incredible achievement, something that I strive for. And I'm sure that a lot of people listening to this are going to take really, really valuable nuggets from it. So I appreciate your time. Maybe to leave it there and end off with a golden nugget for anybody trying to do something similar. Is there anything that you've identified, maybe from a personal perspective, something that you've experienced, something that you've found yourself growing as an individual through these last, I guess, 20 years of building a business, that you could share, something that you think has given you maybe that unfair advantage?
Like there's characteristics around being around anything which is kind of challenging that end up being important, like persistence and never giving up and all those sorts of things. I totally believe that. There are times when you just think, well, actually, I think that's the secret. Actually, you don't let yourself get into that. Oh, I just want to give up now. Just don't even, the minute you start, things get hard. That's one place where you don't go to. It's almost also like the idea that once I've sold my company, blah blah blah. I try never to let myself think like that, because you end up in some sort of fantasy land, whereas actually you've got to deal with the reality that's in front of you. I think for me, what I've done over the last 5 or 6 years, as I've got a bit older, is I've ended up like my health and mental kind of development have become, I've put them more. So and actually that's important. So I work out more than I used to. I'm probably fitter than I've been for 20 or 30 years. I have a coach that I talk to that helps me kind of just stay grounded when I'm feeling like anxious or annoyed or whatever. And I think that kind of self-care thing actually is, because to build a business or anything really of that grows to a certain size, it doesn't happen overnight. It's like a 15-year journey, a 20-year journey, or whatever it is, and that's a long time. So you have to look after yourself along the way.
And I think the other thing I'm going to take from this is, if you're looking at a long journey, don't run after the first opportunity you have. If you don't want to sell cosmetics and perfumes, then move along. So Giles, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Can't wait for all of this to be over and come and visit up in Brighton soon.
Me too. It'd be great I'll look forward to hosting you here, Kelvin. It'd be my absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Giles, thank you so much.